Hey everyone, I am Joshua Reaves, the Director of University Theater here at NC State, and I want to welcome to our show a production and a designer of productions and live performances, Mr. Lex Liang. Lex, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joshua.
Hey,
Thanks so much for having me.
not a problem. Thanks so much for joining us. So before we get started, Lex, we ask this question of everyone before we get really deep into what you do. What does it mean to be a designer and producer?
I think it means a lot of things. I think, as a producer, I think your main job is putting together sort of the best minds and talent to your knowledge, and that is most appropriate for a specific project. And that can, and I think that the term producer is quite broad. There are certainly those producers that raise money. There are those producers that assemble teams. For me, it has often been the latter. As a producer, I assemble teams and truly produce, whether that's having a hand in it creatively or just organizationally. And as far as a designer goes, whether it is in my industry of scenery and costumes for the theatrical industry or live performance industry, or as a designer of special events and interiors, you're really taking a concept and creating a visual aesthetic for that and telling a story. Now, that story can be a playwright story. That story can be a new brand's concept imagery and what they want to imbue their brick and mortar store with to showcase their product to a client. So that story is also broad. But as a designer, I think that we create worlds, visual worlds based on a specific concept or directive.
Awesome, great, thank you for that. So, Lex, how did you get started in all this? Like, what did you do to become a designer or a producer?
Way back, way back. I'm actually really happy to be talking to a bunch of STEM students because despite the fact that I went to NYU and my formal training is in production design, is in scenery and costume, I am actually a terrible theater person. I did not have the background that the 11 other students in the program had when I entered the program. I did not have any arts or theater arts training in high school. A lot of kids came from sort of arts magnet schools and they sort of knew exactly what they wanted to do. What I knew was I loved theater. I loved environments. I loved anything that sort of took you out of reality and made you believe that you were someplace other. I loved telling visual stories. And one of my favorite things that I would do with my dad as a kid is, he'd take me to the mall during the holidays and we'd look at windows. It was always really fun to look at those windows and try to figure out what that designer was trying to impart to their audience with no words, no text, just a simple design. So I was always drawn to that. So when I first started to see theater, touring shows, I'm from Southern California, touring shows that were coming down, sit down productions in LA, et cetera. At a young age, I finally realized that, somebody's paid to create that environment or to develop that character's aesthetic on stage. And so that's when it sort of started to gel, that was one, if not the, journey that I wanted to take. But I also knew that as somebody who has what I lovingly coined as creative ADD, that wasn't going to be it, but I knew that formally that was the training that I wanted. So I applied to NYU for some, God knows why they took me with zero background. And, it was a bit of a struggle because I didn't know, nor do I necessarily know today what Brechtian means. I was not a fan of Shakespeare. I would be that kid with like reading Shakespeare and then reading the like translation, right? The contemporary language translation.
Yeah.
I was not familiar with contemporary playwrights. And and this is not to say I didn't have a respect for it. I always have and continue to have great respect for all of those facets of theater. I just never had that kind of exposure. So going to school for it was a very eye-opening experience. And then actually I was asked, rather told, to take a year off my second year from the program because to sort myself out. Like I said, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue down that path because I didn't know if I was an appropriate theater person pursuing a career in theater. By some very great opportunities, by some very gracious teachers, I assisted them in shows and on various projects that were creative visual storytelling, but were not formally theater. I knew that I did want to go back and finish my degree. So tail between my legs, big old slab of humble pie later, I finished the degree. And fortunately and very gratefully have been working ever since.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much for that. And everyone, just don't forget, quick Q&A is open. Start throwing those questions out there for Lex. All right, so talk to us about, when we'll go back to pre-COVID, what is a typical day for you? You get up in the morning and what happens?
A typical day, let's see, right before COVID, let's say the beginning of March, I was fortunate enough to be on 6 productions and a big event. And so it's a little bit of a juggle. My day usually starts about 5 a.m. And the reason being, this is not some kind of badge of honor, it's practicality. Because between 5 and 9, really, that time is sacred because nobody bothers me. I don't answer, I don't get emails. Everybody has that sort of agita or that anxiety, right? Like you're composing an email, and it's like bing, bing, and all these new things start coming in. Between 5 and 9 is my first day, really. And that's when I really get to do some organizational things. I get to plan out the day, make my various to-do lists. And then usually it starts with a call with my team. At the time we were working on a anniversary event. So that was checking with them and making sure everybody had everything that they needed, because after that point, I'm basically not available for the rest of the day, because at that point I was in Minneapolis at the Guthrie. So, which well, right?
Yep.
So we were mid production on Emma there, and I was about to fly to Louisville. So we had a bunch of fittings, as far as a typical day, that can be meetings and fittings, that can be swatching, that can be doing research tear sheets, that can be reviewing drafting, that can be going over budgets. I spent a lot of time redlining contracts and budgets for the producing part of me. So it's a very sort of specifically laid out, and here's a video, this is a typical day when I'm on location at a theater working in a costume shop. It's meetings and fittings and working with the wig and hair designer and the makeup designer and the various shop personnel and craftspeople. I think the thing I love most about my job is that there isn't really a typical day. What's typical about my day is it generally starts early, it ends late, and I get to do something that I really love. And like I was saying to you earlier, Joshua, I suffer from what I lovingly call creative ADD. And so it doesn't matter what type of project I'm on, chances are I'm in love with what I'm doing that day. And I'm certainly in love with some of the people I get to work with every day. So, and what we get to do is designers that travel often doesn't matter what city we're in, right? Dallas, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Louisville. You create these like sort of mini work families, these friend fams. And it's lovely to see them, and it's lovely to get to walk from the hotel to the shop and get to actually work with these people that you really enjoy working with. And so for those reasons, I'm very fortunate. But there isn't really a typical day.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. And that's what I love about being in the arts is that's usually the case with most careers in the arts. So we have a couple of questions popping up.
Have some questions.
Morgan's asking, let's go with how has COVID affected your career? Since from an outsider's view, it seems that the theatrical world was put on pause by COVID.
It's a really great question, Morgan. And I think a lot of people are having great anxieties, understandably, about the current situation. And look, one thing that I will say, which I've told a lot of people who have asked that, is there are lots of projections happening right now. And whether it's Charlotte and the League saying that Broadway is going to open, April, or pushing it back and pushing it back. There is no safe way to reopen theaters, whether it's regionally or in New York, without a vaccine. And that's what I've said from the start, and that's what I will continue to say. And I would love it if somebody proved me wrong, but there's also no financial projection that allows a company of a Broadway house size or a large regional house to have a show be financially solvent at 30 and 40% capacity. So, and the baseline we have to remember is, theater is really celebrating being in a room with people, sharing that experience, and it never happens the same way twice. And, you're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're not touching it. Sometimes you're smelling it, but there's almost that other, you're feeling it, right? And when you have partitions and you have the PPE, which I understand are completely necessary at this point, and God bless the productions who are trying to forge ahead with these new and various mediums and methodologies, it's just not the same. And we, as theater professionals, and as people who are invested in both the companies, the projects, need to also be invested in the audiences. So, until there's a true safe vaccine, I think it's going to be a really tough uphill battle to actually produce again. So having said that, all of my theatrical projects very quickly came to a halt. I think that people were being very hopeful, and so they were postponing opening dates. I wrote it all off because I have family who lives in Asia, and sort of they were tracking this thing, and it seemed very clear that we did not have a good national grasp on this. And so it became very clear to me that between travel to the various cities where these shows were happening and the actual workload that needed to happen, these projects were just going to be canceled. So at the moment, theater work is on hold for me for sure. I have explored, and I'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about my company LDC, but I've explored various different avenues, for work. I haven't done film and TV commercials for almost 10 years now, but I jumped back in the saddle last week and we just did a national commercial. I was consulting with a couture fashion brand based in Brooklyn, doing some business consulting, some design work. So, I think it's really important particularly for those theater students who just graduated and this is their new frontier and they are completely at a loss. It's heartbreaking. We will be back. You need to be patient. We all need to be patient. And we need to be resourceful. And there's no people more resourceful that I know than production people, because you are so blessed with a myriad scope of skills, and production people work really hard. And there's no doubt in my mind that everybody can find, creative work adjacent to what they have sort of set their heart to pursue as their career. So that, it's a terrible situation. It sucks real bad right now, but we have to be sort of resilient.
Yeah, thank you. And Morgan, I know that had to have answered the question right there, but I also want to tag on to that. Of the projects that you are working on, Lex, what is the events in the world, pandemic and everything else, especially here in the United States, how is that, or has it affected your artistic approach to some of the projects you work on?
Great question. Right now I'm slated to do a couple of projects. down the pipeline, and we're sort of on the fences. I know a lot of creative institutions are. Will it be remote? Will it be in person? And all of those sort of have to factor into how you're going to present something. So obviously, if you're Zooming a live performance, there are specific parameters that you have to sort of keep in mind as you're designing an environment that's going to be streamed as opposed to experienced in life. So that's constantly sort of evolving. Also, it's making sure that you continuously do your due diligence in terms of your own safety and the safety of others, right? So that is wearing the PPE, as annoying as it is. And that is, while we were on set, we had basically, COVID compliance team, and everybody's temperature gets taken. You are, very kindly reprimanded if you touch your mask or remove your mask without using the straps. So there's all these sort of compliance things that we've had to incorporate into our regular day-to-day pre-production, shoot, and post-production schedules. So more than anything, it's allowing that extra sort of time and headspace to deal with it.
Great. Let's see. Morgan again is asking another question. Which project that you have been involved in are you most proud of, and why?
Oh gosh, Morgan. I am proud of every project I've worked on, even the projects that I think were not as successful as they could have been, because each project is a learning experience. Ideally, you make or maintain a relationship in a project, or you have the wherewithal to walk away from a relationship, and that's okay too. But I think, I can actually connect every single professional project that I've ever done to one equity showcase that I did while I was still in undergrad, that my scenic design professor, Dan Kuchar, shout out to Dan, was not able to do. And so he passed along to me this project. And at the time, we were not allowed to take on outside work, but I kind of did it at the table. Sorry, Chris Janig, I actually did that. And from that one project, I can literally connect every theatrical project and every interior project, every special event, any work project I've taken, and there have been hundreds at this point, to that one show. So I would say if I had to pick one, it would be that one.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know we have a couple of our attendees have attended a lot of our shows, and I think they'll remember that everyone says the same thing. I can always track it right back to that first show, and it's a small world.
And it's a small world. Everyone knows everybody. You create a tight network. You expand a broad network, and so that's all the more reason why you sort of want to always treat each other with respect, even if you disagree, and keep your nose clean.
So we'll stay with theater for a bit. You've operated as both a costume designer and a scenic designer. I'm curious to hear, do you have a preference for one or the other? And also, do you find it hard to do or challenging to work on both or just one on a particular show?
Very great questions, Joshua. When I was starting out, right, because I didn't have any sort of base knowledge, I would just sort of absorb all of these. Way back in the day, we would like sit around Barnes and Nobles or Rizzoli's and like go through all of those big, gorgeous coffee table photo tomes of like productions, right, of the big splashy musicals. At the time, and this was sort of like post the great British invasion of musicals in the mid-late 80s, it was all scenography. So whether it was John Napier doing clothes and sets, or whether it was Santo Loquasto, or who's my Tony Walton, it's a very, now Santo's not British, obviously, but it's a very sort of scenography based thing. Now, I now have colleagues who are phenomenal lighting and scenic designers, scenic and costume designers, costume and lighting designers, which I actually find the most fascinating. For me, I could not divorce designing an environment that was inhabited by characters without designing what those characters or who those characters were. Conversely, I could not divorce designing these characters without designing or thinking about what the environment was that they inhabited. So for me, those two things really have always gone hand in hand, for better or worse. I mean, and to answer your other question, Josh, I don't have a preference. In fact, most times, if I'm designing a set only, I often first think, who are these people who live here? Like, how do they color this world? You know, what do they bring to this environment? And then the flip of that is, of course, if I'm designing clothes, like what of this environment influences these people and the choices that they make in their wardrobe? Because remember, as costume designers, you have 2 hours to give a lot of information about a character. And sometimes those characters aren't even on stage that often, right? So your choices have to be really clear. As a scenic and costume designer, you're able to sort of marry those two things and make sure that the choices that you make for characters influence the choices that you make for scenery and vice versa. Um, I will also say, though, that I thoroughly love working with scenic and costume designers because it's a conversation that you aren't having in your head by yourself. And well, I have them out loud with myself, but it's a conversation that you're able to have with another creative collaborator who is not thinking the same way that you are and is thinking completely differently or adjacently. And often that creates a beautiful stage picture that you wouldn't necessarily have come up with yourself. I think that answered your questions. Did
No,
it?
that hit. Just speaking of questions, everyone keep them coming. Let's make sure we get everything out of Lex. Well, he's here to teach us so much.
Pull it out of me.
Yeah. So let's see here. Can you tell me, do you have a favorite set design that you have worked on? What
Oh, do I have a favorite set design?
I know they're all your babies, but maybe something.
They're all my babies. I got to pick a favorite. You know, again, I guess it would come down to it's interesting because I probably do, you know, 50% costume design. I would say maybe 30% scenic design and like 20% both, right? Some combination of those proportions. The first show that I did, that EST showcase I was mentioning back in 2004 or something, was scenic design, and I was really proud of that. And I think that it actually paid off in a lot of good ways. You know, looking back, I was kind of impressed with my young self. Like I'm not sure that I would have come up with those things, you know, now. But as far as sets, I say this quite honestly, I do not have a favorite.
All right. Same question, costumes. Same answer?
Same question, costumes. Same answer. Each project is I don't even believe this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Each project is a precious baby. And we say that because the project needs to believe that. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. But I do believe firmly that each project has a special purpose, right? Special meaning, special purpose. And so for those reasons, you know, I can't pick one.
All right. So you're also a member of USA. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of information as to what that is and how you find that helpful being a part of that organization.
You know, I have a lot of mixed feelings of our union, as I'm sure a lot of our members do. I think, you know, for those students and community members really interested, so United Scenic Artists is the representing union for theatrical designers and those designers in the entertainment industry. So it covers sound designers, projection designers, scenic designers, costume designers, lighting designers, and, you know, the various assistants and associates that work under that contract. At its core, it is a labor union. There was a time, you know, when you know, it was sort of you know, a big deal, and it is a big deal. It's something that I think you should be proud of as a proud member of the union. It was sort of this thing that was touted in school that was like, oh, like, are you going to join USA? Like, do you have the opportunity? And, it was at the time was very expensive to join. Sometimes they would do what they call portfolio reviews, and you would show your stuff. And if it came with an offer for a job as mine did, um, it's that much more reason for them to sort of entertain your request to become part of the union. At the time, I don't know if this is any longer true, but I was the youngest person to join as both a scenic and costume designer. And it was, I think the only reason that I was able to is because I had a valid offer on the table. So the other thing that you should know about United Scenic Artists is, it's sort of a rock and a hard place. There are union shows, whether there are League of Regional Theater shows or Broadway or off Broadway, that are required to hire union personnel, union designers. And so in order to get that job, you have to be part of the union. But the sort of hard place is like, in order to be part of the union, you have to sort of have those jobs. So it's a little tricky, right? But they do make it possible for people to join. Like any other union, you pay your dues. Like any other union, they look after their members. Our union is currently going through, I think, some growing pains, which I think are necessary. I think that they are hearing, or at least, going through the motions of listening to the voices of, BIPOC and other marginalized theater artists that I think, have a very valid voice that maybe not have been heard so often. And so I think with any labor union or any work organization, you have to go sort of through these growing pains. And the nice thing about the union is that they standardize your contracts. I think that's the nicest thing, is because as far as I'm concerned, there is enough work for the designers that there are. There are certain designers, and I would include myself as one of them, that work a lot. And so it's sort of at the discretion of like, we all have to sort of look after each other, right? So if there's a show that doesn't fit into my schedule, I would be remiss to agree to do it if I really couldn't focus my energies on that production as I was on the other production that I've already said yes to. So it would be the most responsible thing for me to pass that on to another person, right? Or to suggest somebody else. Does that always happen? No. Should it? I think it should. So, the union's great. They protect you to some degree. They organize for you. They negotiate for you. They are a great touchstone as far as, making sure that, your voice is heard and that you're well represented within the community. So yeah, that's my take on the union.
Thank you. All right, everyone, Q&A, throw it out there when you got them. So let's move into your company, LDC Design Associates. Talk to us. First off, tell us what is it that they do, that you guys do? Yeah.
So LDC is a company that I started kind of out of necessity. So as a freelance designer, often right out of school, you are not working as much as you need to be at that level to make ends meet. And I knew right away that I had to be real resourceful. I also knew that I was not, it didn't do me any favors. It didn't do my craft any favors if I sought work outside of my chosen profession. So I started looking adjacent and tangentially at what type of projects I could be taking on that, were similar to scenery, similar to costumes. I knew that fashion was similar to costumes. I knew that interior design, interior architecture, renovation work, interior styling, that all sort of related to scenery. It's all sort of concept and style based. And so I started sort of looking at the time I lived in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I knew that I saw a coffee shop that was starting, that was opening on the corner. It was this small little thing, and I talked to the owner and I said, hey, listen, I'm a set designer, and I would love to collaborate with you on the interior and maybe, help you design the space. And she said, great, that's exactly what she was looking for, and hired me on the spot.
Wow.
Boom, and I had my first interior. And from that project, I mean, it sort of snowballed with interiors. And within, by 2008 or something like that, 2009, myself and Sarah Forney, my creative director at the time, I mean, we had probably done like a dozen interior projects. And then we got a contract to do our first event. So officially, the first job that LDC did as an incorporation was the Kardashian collection launch event. And that was in partnership with Annie Leibovitz Studio. And this was, I think, back in 2010. And obviously for, insurance purposes and for just sort of legitimacy reasons, it was really, really important that there was a corporate entity that backed these freelance, there's Sarah and Kay, that backed these freelancers, basically this collective of this motley crew of designers who I had put together from, years of working with. And so at that point, we sort of formed this collective. It is run as a single owner corporation, me. I do not have employees. We've never had employees, which allows the people that work with me to have autonomy over their schedules. It allows them to take on other work. It doesn't make them beholden to LDC, and they can work remotely. They can work wherever they want. They're all subcontractors on extended contracts. And so, from there, and it was actually Sarah Forney who had said, I'd really like to be doing events, which are basically theater. And I said, great, so let's start doing events. So we were doing at that, and again, it just sort of snowballed. So from Kardashian collection, we did the outdoor life installation, which turned, Times Square into this campsite forest thing, which was actually very cool because, how often do you get to say like you were personally able to reroute traffic, right, in the middle of Times Square at rush hour. We've done anniversary events. We partnered with my floral design, the Ivy Joy florists, to creative produce the aesthetic for the Tony after party in 2015. So it's led to a lot of fun, again, various different creative ADD fulfilling projects that, otherwise would never have, come across my desk.
So looking at this right here in Times Square, how did how did you start that? How did you get into knowing who to go to for stopping traffic downtown with coming out of a theater degree? Where did you start with all this in terms of this particular project right here?
So I think, and this is something I sort of implore us theater and production folks to do, particularly now in the climate of COVID, is you've got to be resourceful, right? And the internet is a wonderful resource to sort of figure out exactly how to do things. But at the time, I was lucky enough to, I interviewed actually a bunch of people who were event producers prior to doing the Kardashian collection. It was the biggest, thing that we had done to that point. We were interiors people, theater producers, prop stylists who didn't really know the ins and outs of, the technicalities of those sort of event elements. And Kay Johnson, who remains my lead producer at this point, she brought to the table a wealth of knowledge. And, she was the one who outlined, she's basically like the line producer, right? So she would outline all of the different departments that we need to fill. And then, would break down what we needed to do in terms of attaining permits and, what those permits cost. And I will tell you that at tens of thousands of dollars, a permit is, in New York City, certainly, is probably your biggest line item in your budget, whether it's a permit or a venue, right? Like that's your big ticket item. So you're showing Operation Smile stuff right now, which there was just Operation Smile Johnson & Johnson's 30th anniversary gala, which we did several years ago. The space alone is like a $15,000 expense. That's for one day. So, you've got to make sure that you've got somebody on top of those numbers and also knows sort of exactly what permits you need, either for space or certainly in a place like New York City for parking a truck or for driving a specific type of vehicle. It's all those sort of little things, that I geek out about because I think it's so fascinating, the ins and outs of all of this stuff. And to be sort of OCD about all those details. And again, as a good producer would probably agree with me, hire somebody who knows it better than you do.
that's exactly why we have you on the show, to talk to everyone, because you know better than we do here. So here we go. Let's look at Pop-Up Pianos. Can you tell us about that project and what that was about?
PopUp Pianos was very cool. We worked as we did not actually. So a little bit of background. PopUp Pianos was a project that was to bring arts awareness throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. It was started by Sing for Hope, which is a philanthropic not-for-profit organization here in the city. They bring arts education to at-risk kids, at-risk students. Isaac with his big pink bow, and they do arts outreach to various schools throughout the city. Their biggest, and now it's become annual, and I think we only did it for 2 years or 3 years. Their biggest sort of publicity stunt is the launching of these public pianos. It's been done all over the world in various cities. That what Sing for Hope brought to it was they wanted to tie each piano to a specific artist or a New York icon. So you saw Isaac Mizrahi, fashion designer, who designed a piano. And so they wanted to do this, then they wanted to launch them, secure them in place for 2 weeks. And I will say that the city of New York demands that if you put something like a piano on the side of the street, it has to play. So your art installation has to do exactly what you say it's going to do. Otherwise, so for instance, in Staten Island, when somebody took a baseball bat to a piano, it's now a heap of garbage, and that has to be removed because we'll be cited for it. So Sing for Hope had hired LDC to basically project manage and produce this entire thing. So what that meant was we had to store 88 pianos plus an extra, 30 backup pianos in a warehouse and maintain that warehouse, schedule the tunings and the refurbishings of all the pianos, schedule all of the artists or their teams who were going to come in and decorate the pianos, outfit the pianos with security measures, and then launch all those pianos. We had 1 day to launch 88 pianos in 5 boroughs. So I think we had 6 22-foot trucks or something that were just, I remember we met at like 5 a.m., all these booklets that we created with maps and different routes, parking permits, roadway permits, all of this paperwork, and it was all organized. And again, the team was incredible, because, if you put a piano in Union Square, it has to come with a permit, because the bureaucracy of New York doesn't allow Parks and Rec services to necessarily know what the mayor's office is doing, right? So they don't have the same kind of sort of team meeting in the morning that we did. So a lot of it was sort of explaining to these people, like, this is the project we're doing, here's the sign off, here's the certificate, the permit, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's 2 weeks of maintenance. So at the time, like my phone was buzzing nonstop, like, hey, we've got a damaged piano here, there's rain damage on this one. We were organizing community leaders who were going out when it would suddenly thunderstorm in the middle of July or whenever we did it, to cover the pianos with a tarp. So all of that stuff had to be stored at the bench. So it was a huge sort of logistical thing. So with respect to what we did for design, I think we did a very good job at designing the systems that allowed it to launch successfully and to maintain them. Not traditional design, obviously. And then, provide the wherewithal for managing that project smoothly.
Well, as we can all see, you've done with LDC has done all sorts of different things. And we know that there's not a typical day, but can you take us through, say, what is the process from a client coming to you and saying, hey, I want to do X, Y, or Z? How much do you put your hands on it, and what is it that you do, and how much do you pass on to all those people you hire in?
I think, when I'm first called and speak with a client, what I want to know is, so I'm sort of a split balance between a creative and sort of a logistics, business person. I want to know the scope of that project. I want to know, if it's possible, if they've got the money to do it, if they've got the time to do it, and what it is that they really are trying to achieve, right? Because oftentimes a marketing client or something will come to us and they'll say, oh, I want to do this, this, and this is the event that I'm thinking of. And well, that's all great, but if you're launching a fashion brand, I don't think a food truck parade is really the route to go. But they all have their sort of marketing hubs and stuff, and these are the ideas that they're throwing out. And so you have to sort of gingerly walk them through often, and this is where the theater training comes in. Like, what's your objective here? Like, what is the concept you're trying to impart upon your audience? And like, let's work backwards from there. So, okay, it's a fashion brand. So maybe we work with like a fashion photographer in their studio. Like, is there some sort of fashion photography auction that we can create for you if you're trying to sort of raise funds or something? Do we do a fashion show? And how, what are you going to showcase at that fashion show, and who's going to come to the fashion show? And so, you sort of want to start dissecting that client's brain and their psyche to figure out, okay, is this a project that we can even work on? Because we can do anything. I mean, I say that quite confidently, as long as we have the resources to do it. And that's how much faith I have in my team. Once I sort of get that whittled down with the client, I'm able to say, okay, so it sounds like what you're trying to do is you're doing a fashion show, so we need a venue. If you're going to have a bunch of VIPs there, we're going to need street parking permits, or we need to close that street down. We also, depending on the scope of that build, we're going to have to rent that venue for 2 days. So we load in the day before, we have the event, we load in the day after, load out the day after. Then we start talking about production budget, right? And like I said before, that venue and those permits are your big ticket items. So often, by the time you get those out of the way, your budget's pretty small, right? And so that's when the creativity comes in. And so once I've established all of that stuff and have the sort of the parameters of the project, then I can say, okay, I need Sarah on this because she has her finger on the pulse of fashion right now. She knows exactly what's trending. She knows spaces. I need Kay on this, obviously, because she's the producer that, can get anything done, and she can, deal with all the parking, all the permits, all of this stuff. And then what? I need fabricators, so I know which fabricator I'm going to go to. Then I get to start putting together sort of the ground team, which is like, okay, we need dressers, we need wardrobe personnel, we need handlers, we need to set up a green room. Do we need catering? Do we need an alcohol permit? What's the fire occupancy of the venue? And you've got to make sure that all of those things sort of are congruent with what the marketing company or the PR team wants to pursue and execute. So it all sort of snowballs from there, but it all comes down to, I think it even says, when they're developing our website, like it all comes down to that concept. As long as we know what that concept is and what it is that you're trying to pursue, we can put all the pieces together.
Awesome. Well, Morgan's asking, and I know you just did a national, you're doing a national commercial for the holidays. She asked, have you done any film work? And if so, how much does organizing film projects differ from organizing on-stage productions?
I think from a production perspective, I mean, most of the principles and tenets of production design, costume, scenery, design, film production, costume design, most of those principles and tenets, I would say, are very similar. Obviously, the medium is very different. And so, and often the budget is. So really the biggest difference comes with scale. So if you're doing, and I've done a bunch of film projects, most of them are smaller independent films. When you work, on a project that has a certain scope, but is a certain scale, you've got to sort of mitigate those challenges by coming up with creative things. So the approach is very similar. What I dislike about film is it doesn't shoot in sequence. And so what's wonderful about, so it's a little bit like the theatrical rehearsal process, right? Like depending on your director, they won't rehearse a show in sequence. And it's frustrating when all of your work, which is, I'm thinking specifically about this vampire movie that I did years and years ago, there were levels of distressing that needed to happen, but you didn't know exactly what the director was going to do within that specific scene that allowed for that kind of distressing to be continuous through the movie. So, and this is a time where not everybody had, God, I'm gonna age myself, cameras on their phones. So it was a lot of digital photo and a lot of Polaroids, right? Because I had to hire somebody whose job it was just to keep the continuity clear. Right? So we had big old timelines on board. So that's the biggest for me, for a costume designer, certainly, and as a scenic designer, I think the biggest challenge is that continuity. because you shoot out a sequence, you've got to basically cover your butt any which way, because and oftentimes, and you have the voice, speak up. If something gets shot out of sequence and it looks a certain way, and then they do something before, sometimes you have to go back and reshoot because it's not the same image. And you've just got to stay really on top of the organization. So that's the biggest difference for me.
Cool. Thank you, Lex. So with a background in theater and now running LDC, what non-theater class should our students look to for studying that you think has helped you out the most? Or what type of lessons would you bring to opening up your own business?
I would say, listen, and I did not have, and I joke with my father about this, and unfortunately it's a little bit of a tease. I said, if I ever go back to school, I'm going to get an MBA or something. I think that, they're to survive in our industry, and not only survive, but to thrive in our industry. I think that we have to be very clear that ours is art as a business, right? You have to protect yourself, you have to protect your work, and you have to sort of like look beyond just the art. I'm not saying the art isn't really important, but as far as your career goes, I think it's really important to protect yourself. Do you want to start an LLC? Do you want to be paid through an S corp? What does that mean in terms of assistance? Do you want to join the union, or does it make sense to not join the union, just start another company, that's a loan out company? I think I wish I would have had that information coming out of school. I didn't. It's all stuff that I had to sort of learn by doing. And it's possible to do that, but it's obviously, if you're working on various projects, multiple projects at once, and you're trying to teach yourself sort of the ins and outs of the business of art, it's a lot to take on. So I would highly suggest, any sort of arts business courses, arts management courses, if for no other reason, to just give yourself the background knowledge to protect yourself. And it might come in handy when you least expect it. But it's, we're also taught in art school, well, I mean, we don't talk about money, and it's just, you should be grateful that you've got the job offer. Yes, you should be grateful that you have the job offer, but remember that yours is also, an artistic expression of a concept that no one else has. And what is that worth to you, right? So you should know sort of how to negotiate that. You should absolutely know and understand the legalese of a contract. If not, you have to pay an agent to do it. I don't have an agent because and who's going to protect me more than myself, right? So it would behoove you to either take an arts business, arts administration class, or I would say, art law, or intellectual property law. That is absolutely a class that I would love to take.
Awesome. And so now looking back from that first coffee shop you did with LDC, how much, what's the biggest thing that has changed for your company from then to now?
Oh man. I think the scale, I think, and this brings back a lot of fun, anxious memories, Joshua, so thanks for this. The scrambling always remains the same. Doesn't matter how seasoned you are or how organized you are, like that adrenaline is the same. I think what has changed, our approach, it's not sort of do or die, it's let's do it, at the time, we didn't know what we were doing, and now we come armed with, a decade of experience. And so there's a bit more calm of an approach. There's more resourcefulness, obviously, because we have more resources now. So that's changed. But the frantic text messages to each other, that stays the same. The team dinners that we do at my place, that stays the same. I think a lot of it has, for the most part, gone unchanged. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why the team is so successful, is that none of it has sort of like made anybody sort of more highbrow, right? We're still sort of like down in the trenches, hauling boxes, flagging down parking attendants, like all of that stuff. Um, we now have pins that we wear on site, that identify who we are. But for the most part, things haven't changed. I think that the anxiety of whether or not this whole experiment is going to succeed is no longer there. I think that there's a level of confidence that's changed.
Shoulders. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm so grateful for the fact that, in 10 years, I've worked with the same people from that very first project. And they've been incredibly gracious and wonderfully loyal, and vice versa. I think they're the best. So yeah, a lot of it remains for the most part unchanged.
And I hear that, as you said, your theater work has slowed down, but where do you guys up to now with LDC?
So a bunch of us, I put together a production team that recently did that commercial. It sounds like we'll be doing a couple more of those. And right now we're a little bit of a standstill, so we've had to pivot a little bit. And one of the things that I was telling you earlier, Joshua, is it doesn't matter sort of what project comes down the pipeline or like all of that stuff. What matters most to me, A, as a small business owner, and B, as a producer, is that I have something to get a team to work, right? And so last week, despite 3 hours of sleep in like 72 hours, the best part about that was I gave contracts out to 5 or 6 people, and that is the most rewarding thing, I think, as a producer, is to get people working. So hopefully, we'll be doing a couple of more commercial projects. We've been doing a lot of sort of consulting, and as I've been doing some consulting work for various businesses, I've sort of passed on the maintenance of that to various team members. So, it's really sort of creating opportunities, I think, and not obviously, 2020 COVID, the whole thing's terrible, and we can sit here and sort of dwell on that and despair and whatnot. But I think it's trying to seek out those opportunities, and seeing out, okay, we're like, where can my expertise sort of fit in this melange of crazy that's happening right now?
All right, here we are at the end of the night. This is the question we ask all of our guests, and Noel actually asked it really early on, but we're gonna go ahead and throw it out there to you. What is the one piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to become, let's just hit them all, a costume designer, a scenic designer, or a designer or producer or a small business owner? What's the one piece of advice for that?
Great question, Noel. I will try to truncate this as much as possible because we could spend an entire session on that. I would say this is that all of those professions require really keen collaboration, and I say this with genuine sincerity. Nobody does any of it alone. Despite what anybody may say, oh, I'm self-made and I'm this. There is a support structure there. That might be colleagues, that might be friends, that might be family. Nobody sort of does any of this alone. It's a tricky industry to sort of carve your way into. So what I would say is be a team collaborator. And what I mean by that is there are going to be times when you are faced with difficult conversations, advice that you may not want, critique, etc. So ARRT is what I call the sort of my collaborative process, art, right? So active listening. Listen to people. Listen to people who know better than you. Listen to people who you don't think know better than you. They might have a perspective on something that you didn't think about. So active listening. 2 is responsiveness, right? Respond to your emails, respond to your text messages, respond to people's questions, respond to any sort of communique that comes your way. Respond in a conversation, right? You're going to go to lots and lots of meetings that you might feel are boring or not worth your time. Pay attention and respond. The third is huge, is respect. We have to respect our fellow collaborators. We have to respect, whether that's a job opportunity that comes your way that you know, they might be asking for a freebie. Be respectful enough to respond to that and see what you might be able to negotiate down the road, right? Like, I don't think there's any such thing as sort of a dead end opportunity. So have mutual respect. And the other is tact. I think that it's really important to voice your needs in any situation, whether that is applying to be an assistant for a scenic designer or a costume designer. Sort of have the wherewithal to be able to read a room, have the wherewithal to be able to read the person. You know, so much of what we do is psychology. Read the person that you're talking to. And there's going to be really difficult times, but I think if you have the tact to, you know, engage with somebody or somebodies, there are opportunities to be had there. But you know, you do have to be able to sort of read that space and the rooms, and to be able to seek out those opportunities. So your design and career opportunities will absolutely manifest and come about. I guarantee it. But just remember ARRT, and you can't go wrong.
I love that. That's great. Thank you so much, Lex, for joining us tonight.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, and thank all of you for showing up and listening and spending an hour with us. It's been great. Lex, thank you, and I hope everything goes well for the rest of the year.
Thanks, Joshua. You too.